Mr. Peres, Prime Minister Rabin says that Israel will never sit down in the United Nations with the Palestine Liberation Organization. Secretary Kissinger says it ought to sit down and part of the debate. How is it going to come out? What will happen?
Probably, I believe, in the coming Security Council meeting, which is January the 12th, Israel won't participate because, unfortunately, it was added to the renewal of the UNDOF forces in Syria by the Syrian pressing upon Israel, and I don't see any reason or any good that may come out from us being there.
You think you may suffer from your absence, the PLO being there?
I don't think so. I think Israel has nothing to gain. And may I say furthermore that the United Nations became, from our point of view, a real problem because it takes such strong and extreme positions which doesn't enable the Arabs to be more moderate or lenient.
From CBS News, New York. A spontaneous and unrehearsed news interview on Face the Nation. With Shimon Peres, Defense Minister of Israel. Mr. Peres will be questioned by CBS News United Nations correspondent Richard C. Hottelet, syndicated columnist for the Chicago Sun-Times Roland Evans, and CBS News correspondent George Herman. Face the Nation is produced by CBS News, which is solely responsible for the selection of today's guest and panel.
Mr. Minister, do your remarks about what is happening in the United Nations presage any kind of a change in Israel's attitude towards the UN?
No, not basically. We are going to remain members of the United Nations, but we can see with great regret and sorrow the new role that the majority in the United Nations is playing, I believe contrary to its own aims and hopes.
Mr. Minister, Prime Minister Rabin said last week in an interview with Newsweek magazine, and I quote, "There will never be room for a third state between Israel and Jordan," unquote. By what right does Israel lay down such preconditions and such political barriers to possible solutions in the Middle East?
Well, Israel is deciding on her own matters, and for us, a third state may mean the difference between security and insecurity. I wouldn't like to say death and life, because if we shall have a third state in between Jordan and Israel, it will be a real problem for both of us, for the Jordanians and the Israelis. Such a state will be oriented upon Soviet Russia, will have Russian arms, their missiles, their guns, will menace our parliament, our populated areas, and in addition to that, they may transfer the Fatah bases from Lebanon to the West Bank, making life almost impossible for all of us. So we are not just passing a judgment in the blue air, we are dealing with the problem very close to our homes and lives.
But Mr. Peres, this is a premise that you yourself set up. Need it inevitably be so, or with the whole world really intent on setting up some kind of stable peace in the Middle East, is it not possible and is it not preferable to look around for some way in which a balanced structure, a political structure of peace can be created, in which you and the people with whom hopefully you will live for the next 1,000 years can find some reconciliation of what are now very sharp differences?
I completely agree with you about the need for peace, about the necessity to enable the Palestinians to live their own life. And furthermore, I'm convinced that such a structure can be established if we shall look good enough at the facts. I, for one, feel that when you have two people living on the very same land, you can either divide the land and have partition, or divide the government and have federation. There are federal states all over the world, including the United States of America, if you wish. So in the long run, I believe the federation is the right solution for the Palestinians and ourselves.
But at the moment, what you're doing is standing pat. You're standing pat on strong armaments. You are not coming to the Security Council even to discuss the possibility of peace with the PLO. You say you will never negotiate with the PLO. Most of the world, most of the countries of the world accept the PLO as the legitimate representative spokesman of the Palestinian people. Why don't you, who for many years called for unconditional negotiations with the Arabs, now sit down to unconditional discussions, at least, with the PLO to see if a structure of peace may not be achievable?
You know, sir, there is an optical error. We do meet with the Palestinians on a daily basis. There are 1.5 million Palestinians living together with us on the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. We meet weekly or almost daily with the mayors who are elected, who represent the people. We talk, we discuss, and there are many changes taking place in the area itself. I mean, the PLO, after all, if you will look at it really seriously and deeply, it is a coalition of six different armed parties. They were never elected. This is the only liberation movement that lives outside the place they want to liberate. They don't have discipline. If you will conclude an agreement with Arafat, Jabril won't follow suit. He will continue to shoot and fight. You know, from time to time, the world becomes a prisoner of a mood or a slogan or a generality. Unfortunately, we must look with open eyes to the reality as it is.
Mr. Minister, let me try this from another standpoint then. You're saying you do believe in self-determination on the West Bank, but self-determination would not result in a PLO government. That's what you're saying, correct?
In a way, yes.
Now, let's take the Golan Heights. You said to the world that you had to have security for your northern Galilee because of the Syrian bombardment from the heights. So you scaled the heights, and you took the heights and the city of Quneitra. Now you're putting new settlements, sir, on the heights to protect your presence on the heights. That this seems to be a process of absorption that could be endless. How do you answer that, sir?
You know, in the last 2 years, Israel made 3 agreements. 2 with the Egyptians, 1 with the Syrians. We gave back land for something which wasn't really tangible, not clear. We hoped very much to continue and negotiate with the Syrians in a meaningful way. Instead, the Syrians stopped it, and they says, gentlemen, it is not the Israeli-Syrian issue at stake, but the Palestinian one. And what we really wanted to tell the Syrians is either or we go toward peace, or we shall establish facts.
But, sir, you are also establishing facts on the West Bank, are you not? With the creation of new settlements there, you say you will not negotiate with the PLO on the West Bank, and you have never been willing to negotiate with King Hussein on the West Bank. Again, sir, I see a contradiction of purpose.
Well, nothing like it. If I want to answer in a polemic way, I would say that why can't there be Jewish settlements on the West Bank, even if the West Bank won't be a part of the Jewish state? You can have a Jewish settlement. But I want to answer more seriously than that. There are dynamics, not just on our part, but on their part as well. It is not just that we are building settlements on the West Bank, but that the Arab people are building a great deal of houses and settlements within Israel.
Within Israel?
Within the old Israel, so to speak, in the vicinity of Jerusalem. You know, only around Jerusalem, the Arab people built the last year close to 6,000 rooms.
But they're Israeli citizens.
No, some of them are West Bankers.
In old Israel?
Pardon?
In old Israel? Pre-67 Israel?
Well, in the vicinity of Jerusalem.
But not pre-67 Israel.
Yes. Well, part of it, which is today Israel, and part of it in Israel itself. Israeli citizens. And I mean, what I want to say, there is an uninterrupted movement and building, and nobody can stop history and say, let's wait for a wise word or for a single solution. Then may I again say that we were willing to negotiate with King Hussein, a person that we respect very much and probably is a trustworthy man. The king really wanted us to withdraw from a part of the West Bank, but unfortunately, he couldn't give us anything in return, politically. Now, there is no sense that just Israel will move geographically and the Arabs will maintain their hostile policies. Again, we shall narrow our land and we shall be at war under worst conditions.
Mr. Peres, Israel's policy now, policy of defense and strength, imposes what seems to be a crushing burden on a small country, a country with a population less than half that of the city of New York, with a defense budget for the coming year of some $5 billion, buying F-15s at the cost of $24 million a plane, every able-bodied man in Israel serving 90 days in the army. How long can you go on with the deficits, with the declining standard of living that all this entails? Is the price not too high? Shouldn't there be some other way?
That's the problem. Do we have an alternative? You know, the history of the Jewish people is a trial in two ways: living outside our own country, and then one tragedy chased another tragedy. Then living in our own country and making a supreme effort to protect ourselves and defend ourselves. It is difficult, I admit. It is costly, unfortunately. But deep in my heart, I believe two things. A, that we can face it, and B, in spite of all the pessimism on earth, we shall have peace sooner or later
But
with
you
the
know,
Arabs.
many countries, including even Syria and the Soviet Union, Egypt, Arab countries, European countries, have suggested another way. They have said that if Israel says it will live within the borders of 1967, that is to say, before the June War of '67, that then they will join in creating a system of peace in which Israel will get the protection. I mean, nothing is 100% safe in human life, but it will get the protection of international acceptance.
You know, the story is sophisticated. The experience is worrying. Let's not forget that up to '67, Israel was within the '67 frontiers, and yet we never had peace. Because even if we shall return to the '67 frontiers, I'm sure that the PLO, all of them or part of them, will continue to demand that the whole of Israel will become the so-called secular and democratic state, namely a Muslim state. And we won't have peace again. May I say, I know that this fact is not well known, but immediately after the Six-Day War, the government of Israel officially suggested to the United States government and to the Arab countries that we are ready to return to the international frontiers of '67 on the Syrian and Egyptian front against a complete and full-fledged peace. This was rejected.
But things have changed, and the Arabs now who rejected it then indeed seem now to be prepared to accept it. Why not pick them up?
Things have changed, but not in the only direction that you are mentioning. Today there are 21 Arab states. I wouldn't say, for example, that Libya is an outstandingly peace-loving nation. I can't say that Syria is such a nation. I mean, when it comes to hostility, there is an Arab bloc. When it comes to peace, you have 21 different opinions of 21 Arab states.
How is it then that you are able to say, as you did a moment ago, that you are confident that sooner or later we shall have peace? Who is going to bring it? Who is going to negotiate it? Who is going to lead the way? Is it you?
Well, we shall take part in it. I would like to remain, as I should, modest, because we are a tiny little country, but I shall tell you who. The people themselves. You know, when I'm looking to the Egyptian situation, the growth of population, the emigration from rural to urban areas, the raise of expectations, more and more Egyptians will begin to ask why continue and waste money and human life on wars. And as a matter of fact, This is probably one of the reasons why we had already 2 agreements with the Egyptians. And I do hope we shall have a 3rd one.
You think the tensions and the hatreds which have led to the war will simply wither under the changes in the culture and society of the countries around you?
Yes, I think that when an army is running a nation, you are in troubles. But when
Mr.
But is
Minister-
it necessary for Israel, for your country, to take any action to make sure this happens, or do you just sit there and wait for it to come to you?
Oh, yes, sir. We have to take plenty of actions, but we must measure the atmosphere so we won't waste our opportunity to negotiate meaningfully for peace.
Mr. Minister.
Namely, I'm sorry.
Excuse
just-
me, sir.
Yes.
Excuse me.
I want just to add one point. I mean, we are ready to give up most of the territories back. You know, there is no country that was attacked 4 times in a quarter of a century, and 3 times already made withdrawals from the complete Sinai Desert. We are ready to do it again, not from the complete, but for most of it, if we shall be able to get in turn a meaningful peace, or alternatively, we have offered or suggested the end of the state of belligerency. This, unfortunately, again, was refused.
Mr. Minister, just for the record, in 1956, it was my recollection that Israel made a deal with the French and the British to invade Egypt. I don't remember the Egyptians attacking Israel. But
Well,
let's-
you have some problems with your memory, and
All right,
I shall
sir. We
try
have
to
a
help you
disagreement.
out on that.
we have a disagreement on that. Now, let me ask you.
Well, I must refer to it. Up to 1956, the headquarters of the Fatah, of the Fadain, were at the Gaza Strip, penetrating our country, killing our children and women, attacking our homes. I don't know what you call war.
All right, sir. Senator McGovern said last week, I do not think the Israelis can sustain their position of not dealing with the PLO. Now, he has a reputation of being a fairly good friend of Israel, as many of his Democratic friends do, and most politicians in this country. But in view of that statement, and many other politicians feel the same way, do you see any possibility, if the PLO said we will recognize the existence and sovereignty of Israel, under which you could sit down and negotiate with the PLO?
You know, it's a little bit strange to listen to such a question. Suppose I shall ask you if Mao Zedong will become a Republican. Would you vote for him?
Well,
Or,
sir, that's,
I mean,
that
there
would-
are something deep in the structure, in the nature of things. We, I repeat, we are ready to talk with any and all Palestinians about every possible subject, day and night. We don't want to be shot or killed by the PLO. If the PLO would come back to Israel, stay there as 1.5 million Arab people are doing, stop shooting and trying to look peace, then they won't be PLO, and you won't have a question, and I won't have to answer
well,
it.
then your answer would be, yes, we would sit down and speak with the body that now calls itself the PLO.
Then there wouldn't be a body like that. What is the body?
the
It is a
pri-
coalition of 6 armed parties, undisciplined, getting money from Libya, Iraq, and Syria, getting arms from the Russians. We are talking about something which exists and is real.
Mr. Minister, you said that the people will really be the key to peace, provide the momentum to peace. There's considerable political ferment in Israel today over the question of negotiation with the PLO or the Palestinians, over the establishment of settlements in the occupied territories, over this unfortunate raid into Lebanon, which from here looks like a political disaster. There is concern about the erosion of American political support for the Israeli position. The government hangs by a hair with a majority of one, is it, in the Knesset. Do you think the time has come in Israel for new elections to take a new reading of the political desires and the political strength of the various currents of opinion in Israel?
No, sir. Israel is a fiercely democratic country. As a matter of fact, in spite of all the emergencies that we are having, if you will look at the numbers of parties we are having, we are a very rich and large country. Now, like every democracy, we elect a government so we shall have something to oppose, to be against, to criticize. That's the nature of things. I think the government is being elected for 4 years. It has another year and a half to run. I wouldn't change it. And I'm not surprised there are many opinions. I would like to remark to Mr. Evans that there was a period when all of our friends, for example, objected the mere creation of the State of Israel. They thought this may be a mistake. There were some Israelis who felt like it. But it's a free country, and we have plenty of problems. We have a coordinated policy up to a point with the United States of America, which is very dear to our hearts and which we appreciate. We know that in a free world you can't have 100% agreement 100% of the time to wake up every morning and say, you and us are thinking alike.
But, sir, you have
Are we thinking less alike today than we were 6 months ago?
Naturally, things from Washington, when it comes to Jerusalem, look differently than things from Jerusalem looking back at our own homes and problems.
I don't know whether that means yes or no. Do you think
There is, I would say, a 60 or 70% agreement and a 30 to 40% probably a difference of opinion.
Mr. Minister, you say that we do have a coordinated policy. You know that the United States is pressing hard on your country to take a less, if I may use the word, intransigent position on the PLO. Now, you're asking us for $2.5 billion, not just for 1 year, but for each of the next 4 years. Don't you think that the Israeli government should give the American administration and the American people a little more thoughtfulness on some of these political issues in political payment for what the American people are doing for Israel?
Undoubtedly that we must consider very carefully any request made by the American people and the American administration. But I'm not aware at all that the American administration is asking anything about the PLO.
Oh, Mr. Saunders.
This is one of the points where we are in full agreement.
Mr. Peres, as Minister of Defense, do you think that the policy of raids, such as the raid of the 4th of December into Lebanon, should be continued? Do you think that the policy of setting up settlements in the occupied territories should be continued?
I wouldn't like to answer in a general way because we don't have principles on that matter. Each case must be studied separately and carefully. The raid in Lebanon was done after a great deal of study, after we got very solid information that these are stores of missiles, concentrations of infiltrators, endangering the life of our people. I wouldn't generalize on it. I can tell you that we shall go a long way not to endanger the lives of innocent people. This is a very important consideration. Unfortunately, in time of war, things like that may happen to our great regret and sorrow.
Mr. Minister.
What about the settlements?
On the settlements, if you will look carefully of the map, you will discover a logic in settling the country as well. But again, I mean, we are dealing a little bit with headlines and not with very precise lines on the map. And this includes the Golan Heights as well.
Do you think things in the Far East are now moving towards better chances for peace, or are they still decreasing?
You mean the Middle East?
The Middle East, excuse me.
Yes. Well, I think that, as I have said, the United Nations is playing a very difficult role by giving a majority to every extreme view. I believe that with Egypt we had a nice start, and I'm very hopeful that we shall be able to continue very much. I believe that our relations with the Palestinians are improving and also gives room for hope.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister, for being with us today on Face the Nation. And we'll have a word about next week's guest in a moment.